Assalamu alaikum, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to everyone who has joined us today and from different part of the world. I am Anila and I'm working as an assistant manager for Master of Science in Nursing at AKU School of Nursing and Midwifery. And with me here, we have Dr. Lala Ladak. She is the academic lead for Master in Science in Nursing at AKU School of Nursing and Midwifery and the assistant professor. We also have our speaker who has joined us online. As we move forward, I will request Dr. Leila to give her introduction. The format of the webinar would be that the speaker will talk about how to publish your thesis and manuscript. Once the talk is over, we will open the forum for question answer session. For question and answer, you all are requested to send in your queries to email address, which is just be going to on your screen shortly, which is gradprog.sonam@aqu.edu. I'm just sharing this screen so that you all can have the email address on your screen. This is the email address on which you have to share your questions. So once the talk is over, I will refer to the questions and we will be answering your questions live here. With that note, I would request Dr. Leila to formally welcome you all and introduce the speaker of today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anila. Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and Dr. Cecily, who's the speaker of today, a very early morning to you. So it's my honor to introduce the speaker and presenter for today's webinar, who's Dr. Cecily Betz. She is Professor of Clinical Pediatrics at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine, Department of Pediatrics. Dr. Betz serves as the Nursing and Research Director of the USC, University Center of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. She is the co-chair of the International and Interdisciplinary Healthcare Transition Research Consortium. She is also the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Pediatric Nursing, Nursing Care of Children and Families, the official journal of the Society of Pediatric Nurses and the Pediatric Endocrinology Nursing Society. Thank you so much, Dr. Cecily, for joining us. And we are very excited to hear from you the top secrets and the tips to get our thesis or manuscripts or papers published in peer-reviewed high-impact factor journal. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Great. So good morning, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here, I'm here, and we're going to talk about publishing. And I hope that what I have to say to you this morning here in California, there, wherever you are in the evening, afternoon, that it's helpful to you, that, you know, publishing sort of seems like, oh, and it is a way of sharing your knowledge, your expertise with your colleagues to contribute to the literature, to the science, to the practice, and it expands your scope of your own practice. So let me share the screen here and let's get started. And what I hope to do is, and let's start here at the beginning, go through, and I'm going to talk a lot about the process of publishing and somewhat about, you know, how you get to do it. Because for some of you, it may feel very intimidating. And I hope that what I have to say to you will inspire you to give it a try and to move forward in your career. So I'm going to be talking about authorship, converting your thesis or your paper to a journal submission, to be aware of now risks associated with predatory journals, selecting a journal for submission, which is very important. Just what is this process of submitting a manuscript to a journal? Being mindful of the guidelines, ethics, and I will get into some strategies to help you in publishing. So first and foremost, clarify authorship. There can be confusion about who should be author, who should be first author, who should be senior author, and sort of the lineup of authorship. And so what you want to do is establish that first and foremost. That's your first important step. Who is going to be the author, the first author, senior author, and the other authors. And you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding about it. Sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable. However, there are guidelines to assist you. So removes sort of this ambiguity that may exist. And so the guidelines are here, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, their recommendations for conducting, reporting, editing, and publishing of scholarly work in medical journals. That is really a key publication to go to. But there's other publications that you may want to look at as well, like this one at JAMA. Here's the website. And if you just Google International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, you'll get to that website and you'll get to the guidelines. This is an excellent piece of guidelines to assist you. And it removes the ambiguity or the discomfort in having that conversation. It provides you with a template, and that's important. Also, the American Psychological Association has authored guidelines. And for example, many journals use those guidelines for referencing format, like the Journal of Pediatric Nursing does. So you might want to look at that as well. And let me just go back. Okay, so there's many of you here that have written your thesis, are writing your thesis, have completed your thesis. And so you will want to convert your thesis to an article. And so I want to show you the differences here. First of all, your thesis was done for a different purpose. It was to meet the academic requirements for your program. And congratulations to you, to those who have completed your program. I know it's a lot of hard work. An article is done for a totally different purpose. Your thesis is reviewed by committee members. In a journal, it's reviewed, blind review, by a panel of reviewers. And what does blind review mean? It means you, as an author, do not know who the reviewers are, nor do the reviewers know who the author are. And let me just give you an example that happened the other day. An author, and we tell authors, do not put your name anywhere on the manuscript or on the abstract that's getting reviewed, because we don't want reviewers to know who you are, because it will bias them. And so one of the reviewers informed me, said, Dr. Betz, the author put their name on this paper and I can't review it. I went, oh my goodness. Okay, so I went back to the author. I said, you have to resubmit. Please remove your name. So it's blind. Why is it done that way? Because you can be far more candid in terms of looking at this paper critically and not being worried like, oh, I'm going to hurt their feelings. Oh, I know this person. Now, let me just say too, in the field, in some fields of practice, you may, by virtue of your involvement, know who may have written the paper. However, we trust and expect that you will be objective and fair. And let me just say, like, for example, my area of expertise is healthcare transition. That refers to helping young people transition from pediatric care to adult care, and it's an involved process. Well, it's a very small field, although it's growing. So those of us who publish, we tend to know who is publishing. And I get asked by other journals to review a paper, and I know probably who that person is, but I can review it and be fair. And I will disclose that I know the person. However, I'm one of the few individuals, not few, but there's a small cadre of us that are able to review the paper. So there are exceptions to it. Your thesis consists of many chapters. That's not true for a journal article. It's much more confined. It's much more delimited in terms of number of words. So you have to look at your thesis and determine how am I going to edit it. And I hope that what I tell you or share with you will be helpful in that regard. Your thesis is very lengthy. There's words limits with journals. Your thesis had a table of contents, and in a journal, they have a manuscript format. So those are very obvious differences. Other differences. In your thesis, your review of literature was probably pretty lengthy. In an article, you have to be very succinct. You have to look at it and determine, how can I cut this down to be reasonable? Your IRB, or you're going through human subjects, we call it IRB in the States, is described in a great amount of detail. Not so in a journal article. Typically, maybe 3 sentences. And we are really an international journal, so I find that our colleagues from different parts of the world will describe the process somewhat differently. But I will say, to be helpful to you, you should look in a journal, see how do they typically report their IRB. Let me just say that in the States, we do not publish approval numbers of the IRB submission. Now, that's not the case with some other international journals, but in the States, we don't publish the approval numbers. And I'm always saying to the authors, please remove your approval numbers, which is that's a difference. In your thesis, you had very thorough descriptions of your tools and copies of them. In a journal, we don't want to see copies of the tools for the most part, and we want your information to be very succinct. You present in your thesis all findings, and in a journal article, perhaps you select findings, although there's an issue with what we call salami publishing, where an author who wants to get tenure, who wants to advance, will cut up their findings and present just a pocket of them, but it's not really adequate in terms of telling us the full scope of your work. So it's really a balancing act. Also, in terms of verb tenses, I find that sometimes an author who's editing their thesis for journal article will use past and present tense, and it gets a little confusing. And it's important to, with verb tense, to be consistent with your use of tenses. All right, here we go. So now you're thinking about, all right, what journal am I going to select? And certainly conferring with your thesis chairs, your academic mentors, as to the recommendation for potential journal submissions is important. However, we have out there predatory journals, and for goodness sakes, What are they? I'll tell you in a minute. Also think about those journals that you have in your academic studies or in your professional studies accessed. So you think about, well, would my manuscript be appropriate for that journal? So, you're putting this all together. Predatory journals what are predatory journals? Predatory journals are open access journals that are not legitimate journals, and you can be fooled by them. And the problem is, if you publish in a predatory journal, they're not indexed and they can disappear. It sounds horrible. It can be really horrible. I had, for example, and I felt so badly for this young author who had completed her dissertation. And she had submitted her first paper off her dissertation to a predatory journal, which of course accepted it. And she told her thesis chair what she had done, and her dissertation chair said, "Oh, I think that's a predatory journal." And she discovered it was. She was naive. She didn't know. It was horrible. So she contacted me. She said, "Dr. Betz, I've done this. Can I withdraw my article from this journal and resubmit to you?" So we checked with legal and we could not do it. You know why? Because it had the DOI, the digital object identifier. And those, you see that once an article has a DOI number, it cannot be changed. It would cause a lot of problems. So I had to go back to this. Oh, I felt really terrible. I said, "No, I'm sorry, we can't, and here are the reasons." However, I thought to myself, where was her chair? She should have been helping her with this process and helping her to know where to submit her journal. So this is why I'm giving you a list. This is a great resource of predatory journals. And let me just say, a journal that says, "Oh, we can review it in 24 hours. I'm exaggerating somewhat. It never happens that way. And the reason why predatory journals exist is that they charge the author to publish. And by doing that, they get, thousands of dollars, and they're making money for not ethical reasons. It's really a criminal activity. Now, there's journals out there that are very legitimate, that are open access, and those are becoming more and more user friendly, so to speak, meaning that authors can, through their institutions, pay the fee to have it open access. That's becoming more and more evident. And there's some journals now, of course, many journals that are just open access. More resources. The International Academy of Nursing Editors, they have a whole page on predatory journals. I wrote an editorial several years ago about open access predatory journals. So thinking about a journal, and you want to look at a journal in terms of, go to their website. Every single journal has a website now, of course. And so you want to look at impact factor. And what does an impact factor mean? An impact factor, and it's usually on the front page or of the website, that denotes the extent to which the articles in that journal are cited in other publications, which is an indication of the quality of the papers that are published in that journal. Now, impact factor can be, an impact factor can really vary, and it depends upon the scope of the readership. For example, like a journal like Journal of Pediatric Nursing, our impact factor is good for our group of specialty journals, but doesn't compare with like Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, or Lancet, because they have a very huge readership. So impact factor is sort of variable, but you want to try to get into a journal that has an impact factor. You want to look at, very simply, the information for authors. And I will tell you, I just like, at times I'm so surprised. Authors will submit papers to us and they don't follow the guidelines. So I send them right back, said, fine, please revise. And then once you've done these things, we will review the paper. Looking at the journal metrics, and what do I mean by that? I mean, how long does it take from the time a manuscript is submitted to the time it's published? Now, it will vary in terms of how long does it take to put together a review panel. And I will tell you, as an editor, and I'm not alone in this, it is very difficult nowadays to convene review panels. I can invite upwards of 30 individuals to try to convene a review panel for a manuscript. It's not unique to this journal. It's widespread. And it's because there's so many journals out there now. And it's because people have a lot of competing demands for their time. You know, they don't have the time. And that's the primary reason that I receive from others why they can't review. I love it when a reviewer says, I'm sorry, I cannot review, but here, contact this person. I'm so happy when they do that. Any announcements on a website, like there may be a special issue that would be especially of interest. And very importantly, look at these journals and look at the articles that have been published there. Think about this. Those are examples of success. These are examples of where you want to be. So look at those articles and get your ideas from looking at what has been published previously. This is called Jane. Now, what a funny name, but it's really a great website. It's a journal estimator. What the heck does that mean? Here, if you see this big blank here, you type in your area, what you're looking for, the title or abstract of your paper that you're putting together, because you want to explore what journals might be interested in that topic. And it comes up with this grid. So I put in there healthcare transition. And because I want to show you the example. And here are all the journals that have published on that topic. And very nicely, you can go over here and look at articles, show articles, and click, and it will show you sort of the example of the articles published. This is a great resource. I had a colleague who, for a second here, whose area of expertise is breastfeeding. And she had submitted it to one journal. I believe this was the situation, and it didn't work out. And so she asked me, well, do you have any ideas? I said, go to Jane. Jane. Anyhow, she found a journal, submitted her manuscript, and it was accepted. So it really worked out well for her. It's an excellent resource. So you're wanting to get all geared up to submit your manuscript. So you want to review the guidelines, and that means reference format. And let me just say, there are so many times I send back to an author and say, we do not use this reference format. Please format your references according to APA. Quite simple. It's interesting to me that someone ignores that relevant piece of information in preparing a manuscript, or the abstract is not formatted according to the structure that the journal wants, or the article is not formatted according to the guidelines that is specified on the website, or the tables and figures are not formatted according to journal specifications or supplemental materials. So, so as an editor, you know what, this message when an author submits a paper and is not using the appropriate reference format, the abstract is not formatted appropriately, neither is the article, it says to me that this author is not paying attention to the simple details. And so I look at this and I send it back and said, please revise. But I think, why aren't they paying attention to the guidelines? It's there in black and white. It's very strange to me. Or I think, oh, this author must have submitted this manuscript somewhere else. So they're just trading around, submitting it to JPN. It's an interesting phenomenon. So as an author, you want to pay attention to those things. It's important to pay attention. There's a reason why those guidelines are there. So, Equator. Equator is a website that contains reporting guidelines for many different types of studies. And more journals are requiring that you submit your manuscript according to those guidelines, such as Consort, Strobe, Prisma Spirit. I mean, there's all kinds of guidelines there. And so as part of your review of a journal website, you want to look at that. And here, Consort guidelines, like if you've done a randomized controlled trial, most journals now are expecting you to write the paper according to Consort. Squire are quality improvement projects. And again, if we get a manuscript, it's a randomized controlled trial. It's a quality improvement project. If it's not according to those guidelines, we send it back and ask the author to redo. Also, if your intervention is not described according to tighter guidelines, we send it back. Prisma guidelines for systematic reviews, scoping reviews, right there. And again, if your paper is not organized in that way, we send it back. Here, case studies, and we get case studies. And again, if they're not according to the guidelines, we send them back. So every paper we get, and I would imagine nearly all journals now use a plagiarism scan. And every paper we get is scanned by Authenticate. So when I am notified that a paper has been submitted, I get this report, and this is what comes up on my screen as an editor. I have been very careful not to have any identifying information here. So if you look at the second line, it says similarity check, authenticate results, and it says 11%. I go to that manuscript and it comes up and it has color coded in terms of what has been published before. And the screen comes up and it references the other publications, like, you know, cutting and pasting from some person's other work. Well, some of this 11% is typically expressions we all use, and it's not a big deal. However, I always look because there may be sections that have been cut and pasted, like, for example, with a tool. And that's sort of a tricky one because, you know, you want to be accurate and describe the tool as the creator or the developer had described it. So, but when an authenticate result comes up much higher, then that can be very problematic. And I send it back to the author. I said the scan showed this, and they contact our journal manager, and he will send them a copy of the scan. Also, duplicate submission check. I have, on rare occasions, had an author submit a manuscript twice, same manuscript. First manuscript was rejected, so they changed the title, and a few months later submitted it again. And that comes up and we catch it. So just to know, plagiarism is a huge issue, and that journals have now the means by which to detect instances of plagiarism. Okay, let's go to next one. All right, so I want to describe for you a little bit about the manuscript review process. I told you about double-blind review, and this is for any journal. The author submits, and I always go through the first review. I look at it, and again, does it follow guidelines, as I mentioned before? And then we have a team of associate editors. And if it goes through my review, I say, oh, okay, and I determine who's up for getting a paper to review, I send it to the associate editor. Now, the associate editor, many times, they take a more in-depth review because they have a different level of workload. And very often they send it back to me and say, here are some additional issues that needs to be sent back to the author. So there's a process. With non-peer reviewed articles, those are not sent out for review. There's many journals out there that are not peer reviewed, and you want to know about those. And then open access, and let me just go back to the top here. Like Journal of Pediatric Nursing, other journals, they can be subscription based, meaning that you submit it, and as an author, you do not pay the fee. the reader pays the fee through subscription, or the institution pays the fee for, the journal in terms of the bibliographic databases. Now, going down to open access, that process is reversed, as I mentioned before, where the author or the institution pays the fee, and that article is available to anyone. So different processes. And publication fees vary. And what, for example, individuals who are submitting research proposals to institutions will include a publication fee now as part of the budget, or various departments now will have budgets just for publication fees. That's the process there. Then editorial decisions. As I mentioned, we can get papers, we send them back. Please revise according to the guidelines, or, there's overlap. We can look at a paper, any editor. When I say we, I'm using it collectively. I look at a paper and think, this paper really doesn't fit with our editorial mission. So they may reject and suggest transfer somewhere else. Or perhaps the paper's been reviewed and a reviewer will say, I think this paper really should go somewhere else. Then you have the happy decision of acceptance, or acceptance with minor changes. And usually that's minor review. So in the letter, it will say, based on these needed changes, we're likely to accept it. And any manuscript where you get a minor revision, typically it's not sent out to reviewers. The editor reviews the paper to make sure that it aligns with the response to the request by the reviewers for changes. And revise. Now, let me just say that when you get a manuscript back and you think, I've done my very best, and you get a whole list of requests, you may feel very discouraged. We all do. I mean, I send review letters to authors all the time. But I'll tell you, when I get, I'm being very personal here, when I get, because I publish too, when I get a request for revision, and there's a lot of comments there, and I'll think to myself, I get upset. And I have to be very calm about it. It happens to everyone. And let me just say, and I won't tell you the author's name, but she's internationally known. And early in her career, she had submitted a manuscript, and she had to revise that manuscript 22 times. Now, I've never heard of a record like that. And that was in the very early days. That would not happen now, believe me. But she had just such persistence, and she was not deterred. And this individual is internationally known in her field. And thank goodness she was not deterred. And instead, she was persistent. I give you that example so that when you're trying to get published, don't be discouraged. Even when you get a rejection, you're getting feedback about how to improve that paper. And maybe that journal doesn't want it, but there may be another journal. And particularly after you have revised it. So it may take longer than you think. So the revision process, you're usually given a date, and it's important that you respond to that date. And let me just say, I have authors who, you send them a decision letter, you ask them to revise, they don't revise. And it's like, what has happened? Why? What happened to them? Why didn't they revise it and possibly then get it published? It's perplexing. And very importantly, you want to respond point by point by point to the number of revisions that have been requested. And let me just say too, you may disagree with a comment that a reviewer made. A reviewer is not infallible either. And it's very suitable and indeed reasonable for you to say, I disagree with this comment, or, I would offer this, and say it in a very nice way, so to speak, so the reviewer doesn't feel discounted. I'm trying to think of the appropriate word here. But you are free to disagree because a reviewer is not perfect either. And then, you go through the process of submitting your revision. And here, this was JPN specific, that, if you wanted to create slides to sort of expand upon your presentation, we don't do that so much anymore, but we did in the past. All right, strategies for writing. And I've told you, given you some insights about the process, but their writing is a process of organization. If you are organized, that will be very helpful to you. So develop a plan, put together an outline, and the outline, you can always revise it, but it provides you with a roadmap, a template of how to put this manuscript together. What are reasonable expectations? What is your timeline and your competing demands in order to get this done? I am a very firm believer in chipping away. So all of you are obviously busy. All of you are obviously motivated to get published. So in thinking about a plan, please do not walk away from this presentation and say, great, I'm going to get this done next month. That is surely a prescription for defeat, unless you've already done most of the work. If you look at something and you're reasonable in terms of your timeline, and you are not harsh with your own expectations, you will be far more successful. And I really encourage just small amounts of time, unless you're sitting at your computer and you're getting very inspired. You are, oh, okay, and you're going from one thought to another, and it's really free flowing. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. You're sitting there and you're struggling. And so it's like, what do you need to do in order to pump the ideas? And sometimes it's just, you're not getting very far, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. And we'll come back to that point. what are your available resources in terms of the databases you can access, the, bibliographic software that, you enter your references like into EndNote or some other bibliographic software that assists sites while you write. Do you have an in-house editor that can assist with editing the paper, making sure all the references are in the paper and done correctly, puts the paper together, so to speak, to help you with the submission? Some institutions do have that. Also, do you have colleagues or others who are experienced authors or good writers who can read your paper and assist you with revisions? Not that I do it now, but years ago, I used to have my husband, who's an excellent writer, read my editorials and edit them, because he was very, very good with that. And some people were surprised to hear that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have someone who's in your field read, your work. You may have someone just for grammatical purposes read. And of course, having a thesaurus and a dictionary is extremely helpful, so that you avoid overuse of expressions or terms. Really important. And as you're putting this manuscript together, you may have a question about your paper, and you send a query email to a journal about that. And sometimes I do get queries. Would you be interested in this paper, etc.? Some journals, and it really depends on the journals, that may not, the number of submissions are such that some editors may be able to provide more editorial assistance. Sometimes that happens. We're no longer able to do that at JPM because we have a huge volume of submissions. In the early days, we were able to do that more. Conferring with peers who have publication experience and expertise is very helpful. And perhaps in your network, there are individuals who can provide suggestions or who are willing and able to read your manuscripts, make suggestions. That's why it's always great when you're putting together a manuscript, they have co-authors who can help with the contributions, and contributions that include, editing your paper. So identifying your resources. And I would say in today's world, especially like when you're doing systematic reviews, scoping reviews, a librarian is really an essential team member. And I now do a number of scoping reviews, and a librarian is now a member of our authoring team. That wasn't the case years ago, but it just shows you how the field is ever developing. And then of course, all the other resources. And the internet can be your friend or it can be a foe. You have to be careful in terms of accessing resources from the internet. And then of course, clinical experts, and I've mentioned many of this. So formulating your topic or, getting your paper together, I'm a great fan, and I urge you to write notes to yourself as you're thinking about your work. And it may come up in the most improbable situations. I get a lot of good ideas when I walk. I walk quite a bit every day. And if I'm working on a project and an idea comes, it goes, oh. And I also have my iPhone with me as well, tape it to make sure I don't forget it. And as you're working, and you're writing, and your husband calls you out and says, we're going to go someplace, or your children, or you need to attend to your children, or you're running out of time and you're at the computer and you're going, write a note to yourself on your manuscript where what your thinking was at the time. Like, okay, I'm thinking about this and I was going to develop this thought, and I want to say this in the next statement, blah, blah, blah. Just a couple short notes. So when you come back to your paper, you haven't forgotten what you were thinking about at the time, and the time is not wasted. It really is helpful. Just a few little words there. And it really helps for you to be much more focused. And also, it's helpful to put that paper away for a while too, to come back and look at it with a fresh set of eyes. Other ideas may come to you. And one thing really important about publishing is to be positive and hopeful, and not be discouraged, because it's a field where you're by yourself. It's a solitary activity, and others can be judgmental. Other people can be harsh, and you don't want to take that to heart, so to speak. You want these you want to be focused. You know what your task is. You know what you want to achieve, and do not feel dissuaded by someone else. And so here's your timeline, your idea, your outline, looking at the literature, developing your first draft. And so when you think you've completed your work on that draft, I would encourage you to just put it aside for a day or two. Go back, look at it. You have some other things you want to do to the paper, tweak it a little, and whatever additional revisions, and then submit it, and then forget about it, because you'll hear about it. And these are my parting words to you. It will never be perfect. Never. And I know some authors have procrastinated with their papers because it's not, I want to do some more. It needs to be submitted. If you've done all your work, submit it. Don't worry about it not being perfect. So, and I've included some references here, but now let's open it up for some questions. All right. There you go.
Thank you so much, Professor Cecily, for such an enlightening session. Me, myself, being a research student, had learned a lot, and I'm sure the participants echo the same spirit. I have received few questions on the email address, which I'll be throwing it to you. But
Great.
I'm again requesting the participants, if they have any questions, they can always email me on the email address that I've sent in through email, and I can repeat it here again, which is gradprog.sonam@aqu.edu. So the first question that I received is, there are actually two questions received from a single person, which says how to choose a suitable journal. And the second question is how to get editor attention, low versus high quality paper.
Okay. A suitable journal. As I mentioned before, I'm assuming that you have, been very diligent in your studies and you're familiar with the journals that you yourself have been citing, right? So you may want to consider one of those journals. You've been working with your thesis chair, or for those of you who are clinicians or you're not in a program, what are the journals that you're most familiar with? And you also, look at the references of the articles that you have cited and what journals have they published in, and take a look at those. And as I mentioned, try Jane and see if any of those journals line up. And to be, ideally, you want to publish in a journal with an impact factor. There's some good journals out there and they're trying to get an impact factor. But ideally, you want to try for an impact factor. And I provided you with some of the resources to make sure you're not submitting to a predatory journal. So those are really, if you follow those items, I think that will be helpful to you.
Thank you. There are two other questions from the same person. Does the authentic journal charge authors to publish? And the next question is, how much time does a journal take to publish?
Oh, great. Good. Very good question. You can submit. Now, most journals do not charge, and that's also part of your process, that you will look at in consideration when you're looking at a website. Is this open access? And if so, you don't have $2,500 US dollars, then that's probably a journal you do not want to publish in. So you look for a journal that's subscription based. And really most journals that you probably would be interested in do not charge. And nowadays, journals have hybrids. If an author wants that article be open access, meaning anyone can access it, they don't have to be part of an institution that has bibliographic databases, or they don't have a subscription themselves, then think about submitting to journals that are not open access or they're hybrids. Was there another question besides that one?
Yeah, there was one more. How much time does a journal take to publish?
Oh, yes. Good question. From the time, oh goodness, sometimes here's editor's dilemma. You're looking for reviewers, and sometimes it takes a long time, months, to convene a review panel. Or you have two reviewers that say, yes, I'll be happy to review this paper. And then one of the reviewers does not follow through. Then you have to go through the process of finding additional reviewers. And so here's this period of time that's been totally wasted now. And think about this. We give reviewers 5 days to respond to an invitation. It used to be 3, but then some reviewers said, oh, I was going to respond, and, then I got uninvited. So we extended it to 5. So think about inviting 20 reviewers and you're giving them 5 days. Think about the amount of time that takes to get a review. And we ask reviewers to review in 3 weeks. So the average, I would say, would be 2 to 3 months to have the paper reviewed. And then if it needs revision, then that takes time, and then depending on the decision, etc. So let's move forward. The paper's been accepted and you're very excited. So then it goes to production, and production puts it together in their template and they send it to the author to review, because there will be some copy editing done and you want to make sure it's all done correctly. And this is interesting. Now, it will vary with journals. For example, at JPN, we are article-based publishing, meaning that once we receive, the author proofs and production has made those corrections, they're put up on the website, which is in a matter of weeks, and it's ready for access weeks after the paper's been accepted. Other journals, it may be, like I had a paper published in Journal of Pediatric Healthcare, and it was about 4 months. I was sort of surprised it took that long. So it varies, but you know what? It's also a good question to ask the editor. From acceptance to publication, what's your time frame? And a time frame for many journals is dependent on what issue article goes in. But we don't do that in JPN anymore. An article is published as it's done, and that's done even before an issue is complete with all the articles in it.
The other question is, can we write a review article without any observation or experiment?
So when you say review article, I'm assuming it's a literature review. And literature reviews are it's a scholarly article. And those are very acceptable if you follow, but they're also very involved and can take some time. Some journals will accept narrative reviews, but you have to look at the journal and see if they accept those types of reviews. They will also accept commentaries, meaning if you're an expert in the field and you're writing a paper, sort of almost like an opinion, but it's very evidence-based. It's an evidence-based paper that's acceptable. Journals will look at that. So not knowing exactly what the topic is that you're talking about, it's a little bit difficult for me to answer that question. I've had some articles they categorize it as lessons learned, meaning this person's been, or this team has been involved in area practice. They've developed expertise over a period of time with their research, with their practice. And so they want to share with their colleagues the lessons they've learned through the implementation of this program with conducting this type of research. It really varies.
Next question is how to make the article or manuscript unique and qualitative as an undergraduate researcher.
Well, I'm assuming that you have been mentored and that your faculty mentor has guided you in a way that aligns with the standards of conducting qualitative research, and that you have sufficient participants in your study, and that it's been, the process of analysis according to standards, etc., that the work in itself is valuable. Something does not, I think, if you're talking about unique, are you looking for something that perhaps is not needed? If you are contributing to an area of inquiry, that is in itself unique. Knowing about parental attitudes about a practice, knowing about sibling attitudes, knowing about something collectively about a nursing practice, attitudes towards, let's say, implementing a practice or something like that. That is contributory in and of itself.
Next question is, are there any good medical journals that offer free publication?
Oh, yes. I do not. Most of them do not charge. The idea of open access, and I'm sorry if I conveyed the attitude that there is a need to provide a fee in order to get published, provided your paper meets the standards of that journal. But most journals do not charge. Most journals do not charge.
Thank you. Next question is, when publishing a thesis between the student and the supervisor, who should be the first author?
The student. And because the student, under the mentorship of their faculty advisor, but I would also say, look at the guidelines as well. And, I don't know, like, what may be practices in other countries, but in the States, it's the student who conducted the research under the mentorship would be the student.
What is the maximum percentage of plagiarism for article to be accepted for publication?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yes, sure. What is the maximum percentage of plagiarism for article to be accepted for publication?
So, the plagiarism scan, if there are, I hope I'm answering this question correctly. If there's large, like if a scan comes up and I see all this color coded large chunks, that's a problem. And it's understandable, like, for example, what will come up in a scan will be a statement like this. This analysis demonstrated. You'll get a highlight. Well, so many people use that expression. Or the purpose of the study was, that gets highlighted. Or the sample consisted of, that gets highlighted. Yeah, I just ignore those. That means nothing. We're talking about word for word, copy and paste from something that was written before that is not what you wrote. And as I mentioned, certainly when you're talking about tools, you will have to use the same terminology as the tool developer, because that is the accurate description of the tool itself.
Next
And
question.
and I want to qualify that, like if they're talking about subcategories, for example, in a tool, you say what the subcategories are. You can't not accurately say that, or what the validity metrics, the psychometrics of a tool, for example, they've been reported.
Thank you. Next question. How important is a cover letter? If it is important, what points should be included in the cover letter?
That's a good question. And I have a preference. This is not true. Doesn't mean all editors feel this way. But the more succinct a cover letter can be, the better. And we have some what we call departments or columns, and sometimes an author will submit to those. And if I don't read that and they don't say that, I might send it out for review. And so that needs to be identified. But if someone, I sort of appreciate having a cover letter that just says, we're submitting this is the purpose, the title, very succinct description. I'm happy when I see like a paragraph. I do not, when I see something like this on a cover letter, because I as an editor am looking at other pieces. I'm looking at the title page. I want to look at where the paper's from, who the authors are. I'm looking at the abstract. Is it formatted according to journal guidelines? I'm looking at the manuscript itself, and is it formatted according to journal guidelines? Those are the essential pieces that I am looking at. A cover letter is simply an introduction, and I would not, but that's me. I would not spend a lot of time with it, and I would sort of provide like, why is this a manuscript that should be reviewed? It contributes to the science, as a few papers have been published, but not that, more like that.
Next question is, can we submit a manuscript with journal-specific editing in 2 different journals at the same time?
Good question. No. And all journals will ask when you're submitting, they'll say, you have to identify that this is not submitted elsewhere. It's not being reviewed.
Is it
elsewhere.
fine to share our research in conferences before it is being published?
Yes. And what you do is you identify on your title page that, portions of this study were presented at, and you identify the conference and the date and the location.
How to present the findings of a qualitative research in a compressed form?
That's that you have to look at what are the most essential findings, or in terms of the quotations, what statements made by the participants really depict, most importantly, the essence of what your analysis has described. And when I see, like, I have seen passages, and those are far too lengthy, and it really adds to the word count. Like, I get word counts on qualitative papers that are 9,000 words, and I send them back saying it's far too long. So it may be that some of that goes into a supplemental file. And supplemental files are designed to provide additional information, but in order to stay within the word count of the manuscript itself. And there may be ways with qualitative studies where there are additional content insights from those participating. For example, with quantitative studies, perhaps you are providing detailed information about the intervention itself. So I hope that answers your question. I love qualitative studies. I think they're wonderful. They provide a lot of insight, understanding about a phenomenon.
There's one more question. Can we publish 2 or 3 articles out of the thesis since the findings are quite broad to be covered in one article?
Yes. Yes. And it's important to determine what are your most important findings. That should be your first paper. Prioritize how you want to publish your findings, and always making sure that you refer back to your original study. And also in terms of, like when you're describing your sample, to, you don't want to self-plagiarize, meaning you cut and paste your description of the sample in the first paper and second paper, third paper. No, you have to either refer back to your first paper for more details, here's the citation, or write it differently.
One more question is it too late to convert your dissertation to a publishable paper? I completed my program in 2019. Would it get published after 2 years gap?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We publish papers with a time lag of like 5 years. I had a paper from a very reputable, very well-known authoring team. And I think the time lag was 10 years, and we didn't publish it. We said that there had been too many changes in the field, and they argued that it was still relevant. And I said, no. So no, 2 years is very acceptable.
Dr. Betz, we have received a compliment. The participant is saying, thank you very much for arranging such a wonderful webinar. You have been thorough, gone through every step of publication, the practical issues and remedies to overcome, and the participant is saying thank you to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I just hope that you all feel inspired to publish. And I hope that this has sort of demystified some of this, like, ooh, publishing for you. And I hope that we can make arrangements for me to meet with you again and talk about other issues related to publishing that will be of assistance to you. But I can't tell you how deeply, deeply I'm appreciative of this opportunity to speak to all of you. And I just wish that I could meet you all, but this is the best we can do under circumstances. So thank you again.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the session. I'm very, very thankful to the participants who have joined and to you also, Professor Cecily, to join today. With that, I will ask Dr. Lela to share her thoughts and give vote of thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Anila. So first of all, Dr. Betz, I would like to thank you, and we are very grateful to you from the MSc Program Office, Aga Khan University School of Nursing and Midwifery, that despite your so many commitments, and especially when it's too early at your end, despite that, you agreed, and our participants, we received very overwhelming responses. And today's session was really very informative, and especially a lot of practical aspects with regards to, because when we have students and when they do their thesis, and it's always very difficult, and sometimes it's difficult and challenging both at the supervisor and the supervisory teams, and as well as at the students, and to convert that large 20-30,000 word thesis into maybe a 2,500 or 3,000 words manuscript. And that's why sometimes, it really requires a lot of encouragement and motivation to the student, that yes, you can do it, because converting that large piece of work into a small nutshell, as you very clearly mentioned, the differences between the thesis and when it gets translated or transformed into a manuscript. So I think with today's discussion and the type of questions students posted, and the way you responded, I look forward to that we have more manuscripts, because I understand that the participants who registered, they were students, they were nurses, they were novice researchers, they were residents, they were people from, not even from Pakistan, but also from across the globe. So we look forward to that. We have more manuscripts, more quality manuscripts, and then, especially the students, because this webinar was focused basically on how to support the students. And Dr. Cecily, that the way we were discussing before we actually got this webinar live, and you also mentioned now that you will be more than happy to continue such type of sessions. So that would really be great, and we look forward to have more such
Great.
sessions to see you and have dialogue with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.